What's going on, you guys? TBR here, back yet again with another King of Fighters All-Star video, and in today's video we are going to be taking a look at BS Nameless in all of his glory as we put him firmly under the spotlight and do a formal review here on the channel. But before we get into all of that and more, make sure if you guys haven't already done so, you smash that like button and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get into the spotlight. Alright, you guys, so let's go ahead and talk about Boss Syndrome Nameless. So we've already talked at length of several times here on the channel over the course of the past week about a couple of different things about Nameless in specific modes, but in today's video, I figure what I'll go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and put all of that information together, and we'll go ahead and give you guys my formal thoughts on this character, because I feel like at this point, I pretty much know exactly how I feel about this guy. So the first thing we're going to take a look at here is going to be the typing and the leadership ability. As you guys can see, Nameless is a green defense type with a leadership ability that increases green element fighters' attack by 65%. So in general, when it comes to the typing for Nameless, he is a green attack type, so that is going to be very good for high levels of reviving Hell's Dungeon. So that is something to take note of, so very good there. And then when it comes to the leadership ability, increasing green element fighters' attack by 65% is very, very strong. This is something that is actually going to be very handy, especially considering the fact that we have gotten several very good green element fighters over the course of the past 6 months or so. So in general, a very strong leadership skill for this character. You kind of like to see the power charge rate on these things sometimes, but at the same time, a lot of these leadership abilities, such as this one, are going to be preferable for things such as Guild Raid, so this is very, very good. So in general, both of these are going to be wins for this character, and in general, there's going to be a lot of wins when we talk about this character's kit. So moving on now to the cores, we're going to talk about what is the most important here when it comes to your cores. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about first, right off the bat, that 30% power charge rate increase. When it comes to the 30% power charge rate increase, we've talked about this at length here on the channel. This is something you always like to see on any of your limited banner characters. This is going to give them that kind of get up and go that you like to see for things such as Immortals, so that they can go ahead and throw those finishers out there that much quicker. And in general, this is a character that is going to be able to fire off finishers quite well, especially in things such as time attack. For those of you who have not taken him into the Boss Syndrome time attack mode that is currently available for his banner, you will have noticed that he is going to be able to output a ton of finishers there, and that is part of the reason why he is able to score so highly when it comes to that time attack run. So in general, great stuff. Now, when we get into the kit, you guys are going to notice that in general, when you take a look at the rest of these cores, pretty much standard fare for a character that is going to have mixed dot coverage of darkness and burn. He's going to basically be increasing his attack, he's going to be increasing his damage, he's going to be increasing his dot damage, his crit, so on and so forth. And this is a character that does have extremely nice damage. Even though he isn't going to be in the top 2 or so of damage dealers in the game, he's still going to be in the top 5 or so. So in general, this is a very, very strong damage output character for one that also is going to have a lot of sustain as a defense type, which is something that we're going to talk more about as we go through here. Now, when we get into the exclusive cores here, we do have the ability to become immune to burn and darkness, which is very, very powerful, especially when you consider the fact that burn is a very popular dot in this game for a lot of top tier characters. And then that immunity to darkness is also very important because you see darkness quite often anymore. This is going to be more specifically important towards things such as championship and PVAI, but even then, there are going to be specific instances in PVE where that is also going to come up. Now, decreasing our active skill cooldowns by 0.5 seconds when attacking burn targets. We've seen this type of core in the past on tons of characters. This was a type of core or a variation of a core that we saw started with a character such as Boss Syndrome Ignis, and ever since that release, we've seen different iterations of this type of core. And basically, what this is going to amount to is this is going to mean that this character is going to be able to fire off his skills even just that much quicker, which in general, this character is not he's not going to be for the ability to fire off skills. So in general, this is an extremely powerful core. This is one of the reasons why his character is so strong when it comes to his overall damage output. But in general, you always like to see this type of core because usually it's indicative of a character that's going to be quite powerful. Now, increasing our active skill damage by 200% to targets affected by darkness. This is also very, very nice, being that you can go ahead and apply that darkness and get that extra 200% active skill damage is very good, especially when you consider the fact that this character's explosion is very easily controlled because it is going to be on his core finisher, so that is something to take note of. Now, we also are going to be able to cast that shield. Now, this is not going to be the crit shield down here, so basically that is something to take note of. Anymore, that crit shield obviously is one that people tend to be more of a fan of than this one, but in general, it doesn't really matter when you consider the fact that both of them are very broken. It's just that the crit one tends to be a little bit more broken than this one, but still very good stuff. So when we talk about this last bit of this core, the recovering 1% HP upon landing a skill if HP is 70% or lower on a cooldown of 2 seconds is nice. However, this is not going to be, believe it or not, his best source of heal, so kind of keep that in mind. That is something that you'll want to take note of, because he is going to have a better heal that is going to be on his 3 PG finisher. But even then, this is important for things such as Daimo's base, which is no longer available, so I guess it's not that important. But in general, when Daimo's base does come back, this will still be pertinent. I'm sure you guys have seen that there is footage out there of people finishing Daimo's base using BS Nameless, and part of the reason why he is able to do so is going to be for the fact that he has these 2 sources of heals, and of course, that all starts with this core. Now, when we talk about the exclusive Boss Syndrome Volume 5 core, not much to talk about here. This is pretty standard. We've seen this type of core on some of these characters in the past. I've already mentioned this, but I prefer to see the one that is going to be the variation where we increase our own power as opposed to decreasing the enemy's power, but at the same time, not a big deal. And you're also going to gain super armor for 2 seconds when your accumulated attacks received, guard included, reaches 5 times on a cooldown of 20 seconds, so you give yourself a little bit more protection there. And this character in general is not for protection, so good stuff overall. And these cores are very powerful. Like I said, there's a lot of really nice stuff in here, so not much else we need to talk about, but I'm thinking that you guys can pretty much start to see where this character is going, and it gets even better when we get to the skills. Now, speaking of the skills, we're going to take a look at those. Now, first thing we're going to take a look at here is going to be the S1. So when it comes to the S1, there's something I wanted you guys to take note of. I talked about this in yesterday's video, but we're going to talk about it more here. When we take a look at the skills, this character has something very unique going on in his skill set, and that is going to be the fact that all 3 of his skills are going to have interrupt, even though the 3rd skill isn't necessarily going to have it listed. So on the S1, this is of course going to be his charge ability, which is going to be very important, because this basically is going to be where not only he is going to get a ton of his awakening spam damage, which of course he is going to have that nice extra long awakening spam because he is a Boss Syndrome fighter, but this is also going to be extremely powerful for shield shred. So basically what you can do, thanks to the fact that this is going to be a standing interrupt, you can pretty much go in and you can hold down the button on this and charge this up fully. As long as you have the applicable dot on the guild raid boss, the shield is just going to drop like it's nothing. So this is a really, really solid skill in general. Now, as you go through here, you're going to notice with this skill, it is going to have off the ground. It's almost full screen, but not quite. Something you want to keep in mind with this thing, whenever you're charging it up, if the enemies behind you are close enough, you can go ahead and suck them into it whenever you release the button. However, if they are too far away, it isn't going to affect them at all. Basically, with this drill, he is going to be able to have that instant fear for just touching the button to all enemies, which is also really, really big for him. So that's another big boon for this S1 skill, because being able to just fear the entire board, especially in things like time attack, is primo. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But like I said, you almost basically just got a full screen skill here out of this thing. It's got a full board fear. It's going to be able to shred shield like crazy. And of course, it's going to be dealing obnoxious damage when you're on your awakening spam. But basically what you're doing with the skill is you're increasing the target's damage received. At max, it's going to be at 32% for 7 seconds upon landing a skill. You're also going to be able to remove the target's super or hyper armor upon landing it, but that's not necessarily all that important in PvE outside of PVAI, so kind of keep that in mind. And then you have that PvP exclusive of disabling the target's super or hyper armor for 5 seconds upon landing a skill. Again, for PvE purposes, not really all that important outside of things such as PVAI, but in general, This is a skill that is just kind of broken. This is also part of the reason why in Championship this character is just absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, the S1 passes with flying colors, an amazing skill. So in general, there's not much else you could have asked for. I don't really know what they were thinking with this thing. I don't know if the balance team was on vacation or holiday, but whatever the case may be, it is what it is. So on the S2, this is going to give you your hyper armor with your interrupt. Now this is going to be an airborne interrupt, so whereas before with the S1 that's a standing interrupt, this is going to be an airborne interrupt, and it is going to give you your hyper armor, but it's also going to apply Infernal Flame. So this is a really nice skill. The only problem with this skill is, and it's nice because it does have off the ground and is basically kind of like a teleport, it's basically just going to instantaneously jump on whoever is closest. But with this, the thing that you need to keep in mind is in some situations, such as in Daimo space, this can get you into trouble with bosses, and in general, when it comes to PvE content against bosses, this skill can be a bit of a problem for you at times because you got to be careful with the way that it works. A lot of times the way that this is going to work is it's actually going to teleport you behind the enemy, so that can be to your benefit. However, in certain situations, it can also get you into trouble. So just be a little bit careful with this thing, be a little bit cognizant of it. However, that is just a small little thing I wanted to throw in there, but I will say that probably the only major flaw with this character in general, in my opinion, from what I have noticed over the course of the past week playing with him, is the fact that he can sometimes leave himself vulnerable whenever he's using some of these skills, but being the fact that he does have so much protection and sustain, it really isn't going to make as much of a difference as you might think. Now, on the S3, we've already mentioned this yesterday, like I mentioned here at the top of the skills, but basically when it comes to this skill, it is going to have a hidden interrupt in it. So this is going to be an airborne interrupt. So, oh wow, wait, hold on. Guys, they patched it. They added the line. Okay guys, so basically, I just noticed that they have patched this now, so we now have an airborne interrupt listed on the S3. So yeah guys, that's not a hidden skill anymore. Apparently it was intended, it just wasn't listed. So that's something that's very interesting. Well, that's very good timing, Netmarble. Thanks for letting me know. So basically with this skill, it is going to be an airborne interrupt. It's also going to increase your attack by 60% of defense for 7 seconds when using a skill, and you are going to have blackout on here. So basically you are going to see that increase to your attack by 60% of your defense for 7 seconds when using a skill, which is going to be a very high defense to attack conversion. The thing is though, keep in mind you're still going to want attack stones on this character at this point. When it comes to the defense to attack conversion, it really doesn't make as much of a difference for the stones as people sometimes might think. So in general, you're still going to want to go attack stones, but it is nice to see that for things such as your fame, whenever you bump up your defense and your fame, that's also going to be bumping up in technically his attack as well. So, you know, it's one of those things where this is going to be kind of a double-edged sword of an effect, but you can't ever complain whenever you see it because it just means more stats, and more stats are more stats. So then of course, like I said, you have the airborne interrupt, which apparently they patched overnight. So cool. Awesome. Glad that they did that. So moving on to the finishers here. Basically, we have the core finisher here, which is going to be on the shorter end at around 5 seconds long. It's going to deal burn and darkness damage equal to 3.2 times of the remaining burn and darkness damage, and remove burn and darkness when attacking the affected enemy. So in general, this is going to be where you get your explosion for both of your dots. You know, when it comes to this, this is actually really nice because this means that you can easily control when you blow up your dots. So you always like to see that. It is going to be on the average side for length for a core finisher at around 5 seconds long. So something to keep in mind, but it is a fairly nice one. The nice thing about this thing, whenever you cast it, say you're standing in the middle of the screen, if there's mobs on either side of you, a lot of times this will kind of vacuum them up in some situations. However, in others, it is going to be one of those things where he is going to plant himself. So you may end up missing groups here and there. So it is going to have its kind of pitfalls there, but still a pretty nice overall little finisher. Then when we get to the 3PG finisher, you're going to notice that it doesn't have an effect here. However, being that we are going to be talking about the cards next, we can go ahead and take a look at this card, because basically what you're going to see here is you are going to see that this is going to have an effect on it that recovers HP by 8% when using it. So with this, basically what this means is whenever Daimo Space comes back, this is going to be very useful for that. However, I will say that it isn't necessarily a huge amount, but for the fact that this character can spam his finisher so well, it does end up being very important. This character has a lot of sustain in general. We already talked about that core heal, and now this is going to be the second heal that we alluded to when we talked about that core. So in general, this is a really nice finisher. It is going to be around 10 seconds long. It's going to be a cinematic. It's going to be very good in things such as time attack. So in general, this is an amazing finisher skill. You can use the original 3PG card for this character for the original Nameless if you prefer. However, in my opinion, I would kind of rather just use this one for most things, but there is a case to be made on a budget, especially for the other one. So kind of keep that in mind. But I do feel like in general, this just has way more perks to it, especially considering it isn't necessarily going to be able to stop the shenanigans of some of the guild raid bosses and so on and so forth, whereas this one can. So kind of keep that in mind. So that's a very, very good finisher skill there. The next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the other cards. So what card sets do you want for Boss Syndrome Nameless? So basically there's going to be 2 card sets that I'm going to recommend above all else, and then there's going to be other ones that you can kind of sprinkle in there as recommendations, but there's 2 card sets in general that are really going to stand out and kind of set themselves apart. The first one, of course, is going to be your idol set. So when it comes to the idol set, this is an extremely good set in general. You know, when you take a look at this set, it really has come into its own with a lot of these characters recently and become a very big go-to for a lot of people out there. So kind of keep that in mind. If you have this set on a budget, this is going to be primo for him. So something to keep note of, because if you have it, chances are you'll be able to transcend it, and it's going to help him out quite a bit. Now, if you don't have the idol set, in my opinion, this might end up being the best set for him. It's hard for me to tell because most of my sets are going to be transcended. I do feel like this is probably going to end up being the strongest set in general though. Now I do know that this set is one that, you know, if you missed out on the Shizuru events, then unfortunately you're not going to have it. This is going to be a pretty limited set for a lot of people, kind of like your collaboration sets. But if you do have the ability to pick this set up, if you've got this set, if you have the ability to build it, this is probably going to end up being the best set for your Nameless. And if not, you can default back to your idol set. Now, when it comes to other things beyond that, there's a pretty big drop off in performance, in my opinion, between these 2 sets here to everything else. You know, you can go with an Akari set if you really need to. That's another option that is pretty good. You can go with a Nest set. That's another good one. And from there, if you don't have any of those, you can kind of start looking at your Akanes of the world and so on and so forth. I'm hesitant to go into collab sets and things like that just because I know a lot of people out there don't necessarily have those. But, you know, when it comes to this character, really I do think that what you should try to focus on is these 2 sets here, and then if you don't have those, then you can kind of move on to an Akari set or an Akane or kind of whatever you got available to you, but just keep in mind these are what you want. So when it comes to stones, you know, obviously when it comes to the stones, the biggest thing with this character as far as what's going to make a difference is going to be going in and looking for stones for this character that are going to buff his strike skills, because that is going to be where you're going to get a lot of extra boosts to your damage output for this character in general. So right now for me, unfortunately, I don't have unpairing kits, so I'm just going ahead and using volume 5 attack stones. Now, kind of like I said when I talked about this character's skills, you want to go with attack stones, not defense stones, so keep that in mind. So like for instance, when I talk about the strike stone, you know, you'll see this stone here for the square stone. I would recommend that if you guys could go in and if you have it, if you have this stone, I believe it's this one here. Yeah, so if you guys have this stone here, if I had an unpairing kit, this would already be on him, but you basically want to buff his strike skills with some of these stones if you can, so that's something to keep in mind. But as you guys can see, I just have the volume 5 attack stones on him. And then when it comes to your star and your moon stones, you want to go ahead and buff his darkness or his burn. I'd probably go ahead and just try to buff the darkness if I had the option of doing so, but when it comes to these stones, a lot of times you just got to work with what you got. So in general, you guys, that is pretty much going to be what's under the hood with this character. In general, I don't have a lot of complaints whatsoever with anything I've seen here or how it's performed. Like I said, with the skills, there is a case to be made that sometimes they can leave him in a bit of a vulnerable position. But outside of that, that is really all there is that I can really complain about in here. I really don't have a lot that I'm worried about when it comes to his performance, when it comes to his kit. So with all that being said, you guys, let's go ahead and get into the gameplay footage and take a look at what makes this character tick. Let's go ahead and see how all this stuff works in action. And yeah, it's pretty impressive. So let's take a look. When it comes to boss syndrome Nameless's mobbing and bossing, this character is an absolute machine. However, there are going to be a few things that you're going to want to take note of, as he is going to have a few downsides here, believe it or not. So the first thing that I want to point out when it comes to his general mobbing is going to be the fact that Boss Syndrome Nameless is the only character currently available in the King of Fighters All-Star that is going to be able to boast the fact that he can go ahead and give you a full board CC at the tap of a button and not even need to connect with any characters on the screen in order to give you that. So in general, the S1, all you need to do is touch the button, as we mentioned in the skill breakdown, and you are going to be able to get a full board fear, which is a huge deal for this character. And otherwise, when it comes to his skills, you are going to have a ton of range on most all of them. You're going to have off the ground on all 3 skills, and you are going to be able to charge your finishers very quickly and spam them pretty fast. Now, when it comes to his finishers, the best finisher for this character against general mobs and bosses is of course going to be the 3PG finisher. This is a finisher that is going to be very strong for things such as time attack, which in general is a theme for this character, as he is going to be one of the most fun and easy to use time attack characters that you could pick up right now. So in general, there are very few little things that you could really nitpick him about. However, there is going to be one big thing that you should note about this character's performance in mobbing and bossing, but more specifically against bosses. This character's skills, as far as their animations are concerned, specifically things such as the S2 as a good example, can at times leave this character very vulnerable, so that is something that you want to take note of, especially in things such as Daimo's base at high levels. This character can get himself into a little bit of trouble thanks to the fact that he does tend to like to jump right on top of the enemy, so this is something that you want to take note of. However, it isn't necessarily as big of a deal as you might think, because this character does have so much sustain that typically he can go ahead and tank through it, but it can, like I mentioned, leave him in a vulnerable position that can get him into a little bit of trouble against very hard or very tough bosses. But that is going to be a smaller nitpick. However, it is something that I do feel like, while it isn't necessarily a make or break thing, is worth noting. So in the end, you guys, this is going to be one of the best possible characters you could want for mobs. However, for bosses, few little issues, but at the end, going to be an amazing character in general. When it comes to PVAI, I have 3 words for you. Just hit S1. Yep, that's right, guys. All you really got to do in PVAI and Championship in general at this point with this character, which if you're not part of the Championship meta and you're not engaged in that side of the game, let me tell you guys right now, this guy is a problem in Championship for people. But when it comes to this character, you basically just go in, you tap S1 and hold it down, and what happens is whatever's in front of you that isn't going to be immune to fear, which is few and far between at this point in this game, you're basically going to fear them, they're going to be stunned, you're going to go ahead and charge up that S1 while you're at it, and then you're going to go ahead and drill whatever is in front of you to death. And then if for whatever reason it survived that, then you just go into the rest of your skills, and if whatever's in front of you somehow is still alive even after that, then you go ahead and just use your finisher, and then it's pretty much dead. So in general, when it comes to PVAI, I've said it a million times and I'll say it again, PVAI is a bit of a joke. But when it comes to Boss Syndrome Nameless, he is a glowing example as to why it's such a joke, because pretty much all you need to do, like I said, is just hit the S1, but if somehow that doesn't work out for you, you have plenty of ways to interrupt, so you're not going to have any issues getting comboed very easily, and in general, you can pretty much just go in and hit the S2 at the start of the fight as well if you really would like to instead of the S1, and you can just kind of do it all over again. So there's really not a whole lot to complain about whatsoever here. This is going to be one of the places in the game where he is going to be the strongest undoubtedly, and I feel sorry for those of you out there that take Championship seriously, because this guy sucks for you. Now, when it comes to Immortals, Immortals are an interesting monster for Nameless because Nameless is going to have pretty much everything that you would want for Immortals in a character. He's going to have really nice spammable skills that are going to stay right on top of the enemy. He's going to be able to charge his power up very quickly, especially if he is going to have a leader that is going to be helping him in that regard. He's going to be outputting amazing damage, and he's going to have a ton of sustain. So in general, there's not very much that you can really complain about with this character. He's also going to have that nice long 10-second 3PG finisher, so that's another thing to keep in mind. So with this character, he is very similar to his Unified Banner counterpart in what that character was so popular for at the time, which was of course stopping the clock and charging his power up and spamming his finishers, which this character is able to do in spades. So at the end of the day, as you guys can see in this clip, the damage is just getting poured on with these three characters, and in general, if you need help for Immortals, then this banner is going to be pure value for you. But when it comes to Boss Syndrome Nameless's performance here, just give him a leader that is going to boost him, and you're in great shape. Now, when it comes to Guild Raid, there's quite a bit to talk about and gush about when it comes to Boss Syndrome Nameless, so I'm just going to get right into it. When it comes to Boss Syndrome Nameless's performance against the different Guild Raid bosses, let's go ahead and start off with Nightmare Geese. Now, when it comes to Nightmare Geese, thanks to the fact that this character is going to have so many sources to heal himself, as well as so much sustain, you don't really even need to worry about the ground aura whenever you get to a certain awakening level, because at that point you can pretty much just tank through anything he throws at you and ignore it like it isn't even there. This character can go in and give you an easy one key against any of these difficulties against Nightmare Geese. My recommendation to you guys would be to, in Lunatic difficulty specifically, use the Sure Me option card for this character to boost up his shield shred, so he's able to get that extra dot on there, because that pertinent dot is very important for him. But in general, this character is going to be able to go into any mode against Nightmare Geese and give you that easy one key that you like. And when it comes to Omega Rugal, it gets even better. Against Omega Rugal, this is going to arguably be the best character in the game for not only hard mode difficulty, but also for expert difficulty. Now, of course, if you're wanting just that much more damage and you're wanting to do 3-4 billion damage with one character, that's one thing. But if you just want an easy, no-nonsense, brain-dead way to get yourself a one key against either of those difficulties, Nameless is your guy. Keep in mind the S1 is going to shred shield like crazy at a full charge. So if you want to fully charge the S1 against Omega Rugal, if you have the dot applied, you're going to shred the shield like crazy. And in general, the shield shred on this character is one of the biggest boons to him, and is going to be part of the reason why he's so good here. He's also going to be able to stay on top of the boss quite easily and not have much of any issue whatsoever in doing so. I would say if there's any gaps in his game whatsoever in Guild Raid, it might be against Lunatic difficulty against Omega Rugal, because he doesn't have a Starlight dot and there isn't a striker for Starlight, but that's a small nitpick because, as you guys can see, he still almost does 2 billion damage. So at the end of the day, this is going to be a character with amazing utility, amazing DPS, great sustain, and he is a top tier, uber tier character, with the small nitpick that some of his skills will leave him vulnerable, but that's a small nitpick. Well, there you have it, you guys, the spotlight for Boss Syndrome Nameless. So if I had to give him a number score, I would probably go ahead and give him a 9 or a 9.5 out of 10. So I'm going to go ahead and say a 9 out of 10 because I don't want to do 0.5s. But this is a character that is as close to perfection as you can get when it comes to a Boss Syndrome character at this point, in my opinion. There's very, very little that you could ask for from this character that he isn't already going to be providing for you. If you need damage, he has it. If you need sustain, he has it. If you need versatility, he has it. He can do everything you could ask of him and more. And in general, that is what I think is the most important note to take away from this character in general, is his versatility. This is a character that in an age of power creep is going to age extremely well and is going to be as close to future proof as you can probably get. Because when you take a look at pure damage nukes, any pure damage nuke has a very short shelf life. It's going to age like old milk. It's going to be a situation where Netmarble's probably going to power creep that damage nuke within a month or maybe even less, but I would say that probably the over-under is 2 months, and then that character is going to get power crept in a huge way. Whereas a character like Nameless, who is going to be able to offer you versatility across all modes, is going to be future-proof in the case where basically, if you think about it, being the fact fact that we get so few new contents added into this game over time, this character in a year from now, if the content is still the same, he's still going to be able to go in and do it all by himself. So this is a character that is going to be future-proof, in my opinion, as close to future-proof as you can get in this game at this point. And I think that if you want a character that is going to be a jack of all trades and be a Swiss Army knife, this is the character you want. And I cannot state that any more highly with this character. I cannot speak any more highly of this character in that capacity. And if you want just the tippy top of the mountain for damage, this isn't your character. But if you want a top 5 DPS that is a top 2 or 3 versatility character across all modes for everything in the King of Fighters All-Star, this is your guy. If you want a guy that is going to be in the top 2 or 3 characters as far as future-proofing, this is your guy. So in the end, Boss Syndrome Nameless, an amazing character, and again, highly recommend that you guys pick him up if you have the ability to do so, because I am more impressed by him at this point than I have been by a lot of characters in the recent past. So at the end of the day, you guys, that is going to be the spotlight for Boss Syndrome Nameless. You guys let me know what your opinions of this character are in the comment section down below. I appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you found it informative. If you did, smash that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Continue.